in the performance moment, you have to embrace who you are, because who you are is good enough. I have a need and a desire in my heart to share the gift that I think music is. When the audience is there and they receive the gift that you give them, that is what turns it into art. I had always heard of these stories of conductors, and wardrobe, going wrong and stuff. And I was always like, what idiots? Like, how can you, like, what do you mean you walk on stage and your flies down?
Today on Martinis with Maestros, we welcome Cristian Macelaru. Mr. Macelaru is the inaugural music director and principal conductor of the World Youth Symphony Orchestra at Interlochen Center for the Arts. He's chief conductor of the WDR Symphony in Cologne, Germany, and music director designate of the Orchestra Nationale de France. And he is also the music director and conductor of the Cabrillo Festival of Contemporary Music. He made his Proms debut recently, and previously was the assistant, then associate, and then conductor in residence for 3 years of the Philadelphia Orchestra. Thank you so much, Mr. Macelaru, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So first of all, please tell us a little bit about yourself. You had a really unique childhood growing up in Romania. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I have to apologize. I'm not, I brought a drink of choice, which is sort of like my go-to drink at about this time of the day. And I need, my favorite thing is a black tea with a little bit of milk, with a little bit of honey. And that's, I don't know why, because this is not something that's very Romanian, but it's definitely something that helps my voice as I end up talking a lot throughout the day. So anyways, I apologize. This is such a disappointment.
We won't judge you.
Martini's setup. I apologize for that. But anyway, so yes, you're asking about my childhood. I was born in Romania about 10 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it was deeply behind the Iron Curtain, and it was in communist Romania, which at the time, it's hard to have a perspective of a place that you didn't see from the outside when you are in there. So I don't remember my childhood being unhappy or understanding what I was missing, quote unquote. And actually looking back, it took me a long time to stop. Once I understood what the outside world was, my first reaction was to be angry at, I don't know what, but angry at the universe that I was born there. And then after I left Romania when I was 17, and I got to the US, it took me a few years before I started actually appreciating and being grateful for the fact that I had been born in Romania, because it gave me a perspective that I think not many people get to have, and a different approach and a different appreciation, I think, to life. That we are the sum of our families and of our upbringing. And in my case, it was directly linked with the idea of being a musician, the idea of wanting to make music for a living. And I felt like actually that system in Romania afforded me access to great education and free education for music. And would I have been born as the 10th child in a family in the US and wanting to make music? I don't know if I could have afforded it, So I started finding the silver lining and the beauty in being born in a communist society that, for a reason or another, placed some importance on arts education. So this is my relationship to my own past, I guess.
So how was being the youngest of 10 siblings, how did that affect you being a conductor?
Well, my father was a conductor,
Oh,
and
okay.
my father had started an orchestra in his church, in our church community, and he was a strong believer in the fact that every kid should learn a musical instrument. I mean, not just his kids, all the kids. And so this was an orchestra that he created and then led for, a good 50 years. Um, and every kid that he could convince and the parents that he could convince, they would go to the music school and learn to play a musical instrument.
Hmm.
So it's interesting because until I left Romania, I had zero interest in becoming a conductor. Like this was, it could not be further from my dream. I dreamt playing the violin and being a violinist and a soloist, and I was so in love with this idea. And then I left Romania, and I remember playing for the first time in a really great orchestra when I arrived at Interlochen. And it was within the first 5 minutes of playing the Faya's three-cornered hat suite in the orchestra, in a setting where all the kids were my age, between 16 and 18, more or less, and they could all play their instruments really well. And like at the first reading, second day of school, we played through the Faya, the three-cornered hat suite. And I mean, I was so blown away by this that immediately I said, okay, that I'm becoming a conductor. Like that's if it's this cool and this good, I'm done with the violin. But then, unfortunately, it took me like a good 15 years before, or like 12 years before I could actually get onto conducting. Yeah.
And so you made that transition when you went to Rice. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Correct. Well, so when I arrived at Interlochen after my first year in the academy, then I stayed on to go to camp. And I was concertmaster of WISO that summer, 1998. And Larry Ratcliffe, who teaches at Rice University and who ended up being my conducting teacher, came to conduct us. And it was such an unbelievable experience. Those that know Larry Ratcliffe know that it's working with him is 100% inspiration in the way that he approaches music and approaches teaching. And I was so moved by his style of conducting and how he made me feel as a musician. And I went to him and I said, look, I will finish my high school studies next year, and can I come and study conducting with you? I just, And he said, no. He said, actually, what I need you to do, if you want to ever study conducting with me, he said, you need to study violin. You need to get a master's degree in violin performance. Then, if you can, get a job. And only then, if you still want to be a conductor, you come to me and I will teach you conducting.
Wow.
And I was so upset at this thing because I was just like, okay, he's just dismissing my desire to become a conductor. But actually, it ended up being the greatest advice I received in my life, which was to go and really deeply study a musical instrument and get as good as you can on that musical instrument so that you have a relationship to how music is created. And then once I couldn't anymore, I went to Rice University to get a master's degree in violin performance. And at the same time, I started playing in the Houston Symphony. And I had two contracts with them, 2 1-year positions with them. And then at the end of my second year, there was an audition in the Houston Symphony. And I said, okay, I either take the audition and hope to win and then go down this route, or Larry will have to take me on as a student because he promised me 10 years ago this. So I went to Larry and I said, Larry, the time has come. You promised me, and now here I am. And he said, you got it.
Wow.
Now I'm happy to teach you. So,
Wow.
right, which is pretty remarkable. So I feel incredibly fortunate to have had that opportunity. And then during that time is when I started developing my own philosophy of what I felt the role and my role as a conductor will be. And the more I developed this philosophy, the more I felt confident that, you know how you watch different conductors that are successfully communicating their thoughts and the music that they want to communicate to the ensemble. um, Not two of them look alike. So clarity in conducting is not a matter of looking one way or another. It's a matter of being successful in the way that you show what you mean to show, right? And every conductor that is successful showing this will look like themselves, which is the beauty of conducting. And I've oftentimes said, you've probably heard me say this in the past as well, conducting is a process of self-discovery, where you find out who you are, you find out your limitations very quickly, but then you also then are put in the position where you have a choice of growing or being paralyzed by your limitations. And then once the music inside of you screams to such a high degree, then your body will actually help you show it. And there is no antidote to that paralysis, of self-discovery, other than don't put your hope in the fact that your gestures or what you're learning in your hands will get you through it, but rather is the knowledge of the music and the relationship to knowledge of the music that will give you the confidence and the humility required to actually stand up on the podium and be able to be a musician, but at the same time recognize the fact that you're not really worthy of doing that, but you still do it because you have the confidence that maybe today I can, you know.
So two questions from that. One, I was wondering, what are your personal limitations and struggles that you've dealt with in your own musical identity? And then, well, I guess we'll start with that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think like with all conductors, especially at the beginning, there's so many things that really, really scare you, right? Like the first time you have to conduct a rite of spring. I mean, it's a tough thing to do. And and I remember when I started studying the rite of spring the first time, I mean, the first page is so intimidating, right? Forget about, rehearsal 104 or whatever. Like the first page is intimidating because you're looking there like, my God, there are like 3, 5 people playing, and then there are like all these fermatas and all these things that you have to plan and organize. And and I remember coming to the realization in my studies and thinking, you know what? Like once you go beyond the first page, actually it's not that bad, right? And then you conduct it, and then you realize that there's actually really not a whole lot you have to do on the first page. But to comprehend it, it's so difficult, right? And I mean, it took me a long time to go past that first page because I kept studying and I'm like, I just don't understand it. I don't understand it enough. Like, I can't figure out how it will fix and work in my head. And those are the moments where, for me, I discovered that limitation is overcome by trusting the composer, right? And trusting the composer that maybe I don't have to get to a point where I'm going to be able to comprehend and sing every single thing in my head at the right time. And if I don't have the ability to do that, I'm going to trust the composer that they know what they've done. And I'm going to trust the musicians that they're able to execute it. And that, believe it or not, then gave me the freedom to actually understand the first page and be able to figure it out. Wow. And conducting, I mean, it's all psychological, right? Conducting, how to conduct, how to understand, it's all psychological. And there are so many corners that you have to get out of it. I remember one of my limitations as a violinist actually was always to find a way to really be able to play a really, really great recital, where I felt like, my God, like I kept looking at all these violinists, who would come to play a concert. It's, you go to a concert with Leonidas Kavakos, one of my favorite violinists, and it's like, he just doesn't know how to miss a note. Like, it just it's not part of his vocabulary, right? It's perfect from beginning to the end. and you're like, how do I get there? Like, how do I have a recital where at the end I'm just like, okay, I just didn't miss anything, right? Like nothing. I did everything and I remember after a recital, my violin teacher at the time, Sergio Luca, who was a great mentor for me, and he, took me out to lunch after the recital, and he said, "Listen, tell me what you didn't like about it. Like what, you know." And I was like, I'm so frustrated. I said, there were so many things that I know I can do better, and I just didn't, and I just don't know why. Like, why is that? And he said, well, it's a very simple thing. I said, it's very simple. He said, when you practice, you work really hard. Okay, that's a given. I said, but then you get on stage for the performance. And as hard as you try, you just cannot be better than yourself. And you have to embrace that. You have to accept that. You will never be better than yourself. And he said, but the good thing is, everyone that came to that recital, they came to hear you. They weren't interested in hearing you be better than yourself. Like, to them, who you were was really good enough. So you have to embrace that. He said, so stop. This is not to give up in improving when you're practicing and becoming a better musician. This is not what that refers to. It refers to the fact that in the performance moment, when you are performing for someone, you have to embrace who you are, not because you don't have another option, but because who you are is good enough, right? It's beautiful. And that actually opened so many doors for me psychologically to overcome this, because like you have, and we all have this, like you're backstage about to walk on stage and you're like, I'm going to do it. Like, this is like, it's just going to happen. I'm going to squeeze the talent out of me, right? It doesn't, right? It doesn't. It actually prevents you from being able to share everything that you've been able to do, and to be relaxed. And then the other thing that I learned was, well, of course, Leonidas Kavakos will sound amazing because this is his like 500th time playing the Beethoven concerto, right? How am I going to be 500th time performing this piece, right?
Right, absolutely.
So, but so much of that is linked to conducting, because it's liberating to know that in the moment you step on the podium, you don't have to pretend to be something else. In fact, if you do, musicians will be able to smell immediately, that you are just, and I think you and I have talked about this in the past. To me, conducting and overcoming the troubles of conducting boil down to two very simple points. Every orchestra wants to see a confident conductor that is full of humility, right? Now, if you are not, um, truly confident, what you will be perceived as is arrogant. And with that, if you try to be humble while not being honest about it, it'll come off as being insecure. I'll tell you what every orchestra hates the most is an arrogant, insecure conductor. Now, how do you solve the problem? How can you find true confidence and true humility at the same time? It's all found in knowledge. Knowledge gives you the confidence to know what you're doing, but it also gives you the humility, because the more you know what you should be doing, the more you realize that you actually don't know enough. And that is such a beautiful, organic way of being humble. Knowledge brings these two balances, that are, or this balance between these two things, between confidence and humility. And knowledge is the answer to that. And that actually is something we as conductors can control. You can't really control just about anything else. Knowledge is something you can control because it's your responsibility.
Wow. So how you talked about kind of discovering your philosophy while working with Larry Ratcliffe. Can you talk about, and we've talked about this, about the sharing of what you have to offer and how you can develop a stronger relationship through the music, obviously with the knowledge, but also the personal connection with the music and how that is a part of this whole gestalt.
Yeah. Well, the sharing for me comes from a point of, and I had this conversation with Larry as well, as I know that he has had with many, many other people. And Larry's approach, which I subscribe to very much, and he says, conducting is such a difficult career. I mean, it's a beautiful concept and a beautiful thing to aspire to, but the difficulties of the career are so huge that if you can imagine doing anything else and still being happy in life, do that instead. And it's not a matter of, I'm going to encourage as many people not to go into conducting, because then, I won't have as much competition, right? Like, it has nothing to do with that. I would love it if all musicians would be interested in conducting and study the art of conducting, because then I think it will make them better musicians, right? But if you can satisfy your thirst for music in any other way than being a conductor, go do that instead. Because conducting, it's the life of a conductor, the aspect of the life of a conductor that not many people talk about is actually a life full of unbelievable sacrifices that you have to make, that one has to make. And I know the perception, because I used to be a musician in an orchestra, and musicians look at conductors, they're like, what are they complaining about? They fly from an orchestra to another and they get a fee that is probably a lot of money, and they don't do anything, and they don't listen, they don't pay attention. That it's not. Okay, the reality is, I would dare any one of those musicians to stand in front of their peers on the podium and conduct the beginning to Beethoven 5 for 30 seconds and then come back and talk to me.
Awesome.
Okay. So, and the reason why I'm saying that is because the aspect that goes into how do you prepare to be a conductor, the toll that it takes on your personal life to be gone from an orchestra to another every week, the choices that you make in how do you go about your life, the thick skin that you have to develop, hearing musicians talk about conductors this way, or dismissing the role of the conductor in front of an orchestra. These are all things that add up, and it's one drop today and it's another drop tomorrow, and it becomes a full glass one day. I'm not justifying conductors not having a good attitude about things, but it's a difficult thing to make the choice to be a good person every day. It's a difficult thing. By default, everything you do when you're in front of the orchestra is judged by the musicians in the orchestra, because even from the way you step on the podium, before you even had anything to share, there will be a handful of musicians who've already decided if you're a good conductor or a bad one. And no musician is judged on the first 5 seconds of their concerto, right? No musician. But the conductors are, quote unquote, we can tell if this is a good conductor or not in the first 5 seconds. Mm-hmm. Really? Are you such a great expert to judge a conductor who has worked for 30 years, successful enough, and all of a sudden you've judged that in the first 5 seconds? Geez, if you're such how come you're not the one on the podium? Anyway, so it's it's a lot of sacrifices, the conducting life and the conducting business, a lot of sacrifices. There are a lot of beautiful moments, incredibly beautiful moments that I wouldn't trade for anything else in the world. But my way of dealing with it is, at one point I made a decision in my life and I said, you know what, this is not what keeps me going. Like, the idea of having a career as a conductor, it's not why I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. I'm doing it because I have a need and a desire in my heart to share the gift that I think music is, and to share the overall and to contribute to the overall essence that art brings to our life as human beings. And creativity and art is what defines us as human beings. So I am, in the humblest way possible, and contributing with the best of my abilities to that greater good in the world. Now, Am I able to conduct a symphony which then will change someone from being a bad person to being a good person? Absolutely not. But music addresses a very important aspect of our life. Music addresses the aspect of our relationship with sensibility, right? And I think we all could become more sensitive, more emotionally in tune with our peers. It's the thing that hurts me the most right now is not being able to engage in the creative process, because I really believe that music on stage with an orchestra is one thing. When the audience is there and they receive the gift that you give them, that is what turns it into art.
Hmm.
It's that exchange, right? So that's why I'm doing it. I find myself not being able to imagine doing anything else in the world than being immersed in music and in the creative process. So, in spite of all the difficulties of the conducting career, I continue to be a conductor.
Wow.
Because this is my way of sharing what I believe was given to me, and that I feel I can do it this way.
Yeah. And I believe in I think it's called the butterfly effect, when even though it's not
Absolutely.
going to change someone from a horrible human being to a wonderful human being, it can still, that little change in a person's day of experiencing a beautiful concert and being there connected with everyone else experiencing it together, and that back and forth. I mean, that does impact people in an intangible way. And I think I definitely believe in that personally. So
Absolutely. And it's fascinating for me to look at the same piece of music that was used for bad as it was used for good.
yeah.
Because what that defines is that it's how people approach and interpret that music that defines it, if it's for good or if it's for bad, which is why the process of sharing the music in the right way, it turns it into art
Hmm.
versus into garbage,
Hmm.
right? It goes much further than that, so the note that the composer wrote on the page is meaningless until it is assigned meaning, right? And our job is to actually find that meaning and to give life to that meaning in the music. Beethoven's symphonies were used for bad in the past, were used for propaganda. you know Now, does that put the fault on Beethoven himself? No. It puts fault on whoever manipulated Beethoven's music and those notes on the paper to give it the wrong meaning, right? It's my job to now give it the right meaning.
The right meaning. And speaking of Beethoven, aren't you kind of living on the same property that he walked on in Bonn?
I do actually. I'm very lucky. We live in Bonn, Germany, and actually right down the street from our house. It's a very very short walk. There is the famous Redoute Park, which is where Beethoven met Haydn,
Oh, wow.
and this is where you know Beethoven had this encounter with Haydn that is, now there's a monument to it. And anyway, but the beautiful thing about this, and it struck me because I had not read this anywhere until I got here. I didn't realize this. This park in Bonn is one of the places where they still have redwood trees,
Oh, wow.
redwoods that go back hundreds of years.
Wow.
In fact, if you think about it, these trees were here when Beethoven was
He
here.
was here. No way. That's so cool. Wow.
So I walk by when I used to go to the train station. I walk by and there are these two particular trees that are so beautiful and majestic and tall and huge. And I walk by and I touch it. And
Wow.
this is, in my fantasy, I feel like I have a connection that is actually physical
Yeah.
to where Beethoven saw the same trees and at the time heard the same birds
Yeah.
and smelled the same air. And
Wow.
that's pretty remarkable.
That's really awesome. So your family recently moved to Bonn from
Mm.
Philadelphia? Is that correct?
Yep.
So how has that transition been? And then COVID happening soon after, and what have you been up to? I mean, you have 4 orchestras that you're music director or conductor of, and how have you dealt with that huge transition?
Well, it's been a lot less traveling, let me tell you that. but moving to Germany was a big, huge leap of faith. I mean, my entire adult life was spent in the United States, as was my wife's, and we had always fantasized about moving to Europe. This was something that was really important for us, also to widen our horizon and to give our kids the opportunity to live in a different society. We always, from the moment they were very, very tiny, our kids, we felt that traveling and having different experiences is very important. So we moved to Germany for my position here, as you said, chief conductor of the WDR, and it's great. I loved it. I love every second of it. For me, it's really interesting to. It's like my third time in my life that I'm doing a major cultural shift. And I love finding similarities between cultures, and I love finding things that are uniquely theirs. At first, as my wife and I were talking also, we're not really experts in German yet. And she said, she said for the first few months, I just felt like every word that came out of my mouth was an apology, because you're trying to be kind and respectful of people's culture. So until you learn the way of the land, so to speak, you constantly try to be very careful about how you are behaving in society. But we felt very lucky. We felt very happy being here. Education is fantastic. I love the fact that I feel like I don't actually have to explain to someone what is it that I do being a chief conductor. That is a huge difference. And I think it just speaks a little bit more to, I think it directly speaks to the fact that to a certain degree, classical music was born here, right? This is ground zero for classical music, and people embrace that and they're proud of that. Wow. In the same way that, we have our own traditions in the US that, need to be explained to a European, so it's just a different approach and a different relationship to culture, and to classical music in particular. Now during COVID, I realized that there are still several things that can be communicated, even though you're not able to be in the concert hall. And to me, I'm trying to focus actually a lot of my effort and a lot of my time in education. And the reason why is, in some ways, the one-on-one approach in education can be even more inspiring than sort of one conductor and 100-piece youth orchestra kind of a thing. And so I'm in the middle of this crazy project where every conductor that has applied to our conducting program in Cabrillo,
that's right,
we gave them the option to have a 30-minute session with me. And now I have to, I have like 90 sessions that I have to go through.
Wow.
which is beautiful. Actually, I feel so lucky actually that I get to do this, because it keeps me connected with so many people that are deeply interested in the art form, and it gives me so much courage and inspiration that there are so many people that are still interested in learning about music. And I find, it's amazing, like to speak to someone in Taiwan, and then the next person is in Berlin, and the next person is in California, and I'm sitting in my office and I'm having a mini, discussion with them about fantastic. Mozart,
Right.
And it's so it's incredibly inspiring to me. So I've found this to be something that is meaningful in this time. Of course, everyone is looking at, oh my God, what's happening now? What's the latest, craziest thing that has happened? Kind of an approach. But I also try to find the calm necessary to prepare for what I think will be an essential job for the arts after we are able to slowly begin to return back to normal, which is there is no question in my mind that this separation and this limitation of human interaction will affect our societies psychologically very, very deeply. And arts and music in particular has always been used to heal and to unite those societies. Um, and I sure hope that we can overcome all of our troubles, for all artists that are struggling, even financially and in all other ways, because when we come back out of this, it will be so essential for artists to be ready to do their job. Mm. And it will be so essential for all of us to have the power to address, to address the fact that people will not just naturally return back to the arts because they will feel the need. No, we will have to do an even better job in showing them the way that, hey, you know what, being together with 200 people or 2,000 people when it'll be appropriate and safe, this is an experience that will actually heal your soul. It's something that will feed this desperate need as human beings to be social animals. It speaks to the core of who we are. So I try to find the energy needed to get ready for that moment. And the things that we can address. This is the other thing that I realized. Wait a second, all of a sudden we have this unbelievable platform, this unbelievable stage where everybody is on this stage, right? So there are millions of people who have never had anything in common with classical music. And all of a sudden, they are on the same stage with me because we are all on the same square footage, right? Why shouldn't I be able to use this opportunity to let them know, hey, you know what? This is what I do, and I think you would benefit from that. And, just look into it, discover it. Can you imagine if we manage to encourage 1% of the people that have never experienced what classical music is, if we manage to encourage them to at least look into it, click on a video, look at a thing, like read something about it, and then say, hey, you know what? Maybe one day I wouldn't mind trying that concert thing out.
It's a great idea.
That would be an amazing achievement.
Great. A couple more questions. So I really want for you to talk about a little bit more about your father and the impact he had on you, and the rule he had for you and his kid, all of his kids' potential spouses, and also about you as a father and kind of what values you, because you have 2 little kids, and what values you bring to them that continue from your father, and what values are your own.
Interesting. Well, my father's rule, which was kind of silly, and I think he created this rule after he noticed that with the first few in-laws that came in, this was becoming a trend. So then he said, okay, it needs to be a rule. So his rule was all of his kids played musical instruments, and then the rule expanded and said all those that want to enter in the family, that get married, they also need to play a musical instrument. And then all of their kids need to play a musical instrument. So it ended up being a pretty crazy project. It's been, I would say, pretty much successful, right? And his dream remaining intact. Of course, not all of us play professionally. It's not our jobs for many of us. But I would say that pretty much all in the family could pick up an instrument. Wow. And, do something on it. And if you put it together, given there are 10 kids, and then, you would easily put together a 35 to 40 piece chamber orchestra.
So have you guys ever done that before? Like at a reunion?
I don't think we've ever done it with instruments, all of us, but it's definitely a project that I'm thinking of, because I think it would just be extremely fun.
You should really make a movie about you guys, like the Von Trapps and.
That's right, the Romanian Von Trapps.
Yeah.
but for my own kids, I think the similarity is that I also strongly believe that the best way for a child to appreciate music later on in life, and even as a child to understand and appreciate art, is for them to have a personal experience with it. And which is why my son plays the piano and my daughter plays the violin. It's not because I think that they will end up being soloists, although if they want to, of course, I will support them in that. Or if they want to do anything else in life, I think they will deeply benefit by my approach and my overall philosophy that art actually makes your life better, more beautiful, right? So I give them piano and violin lessons, and we practice with them, my wife and I. And just for the same reason why everywhere we go, we check out the art museum and we try to go see performances of things. And we have given ballet lessons, and like there are all these things that actually I'm doing now that I didn't before I had kids, only because I see the value of expanding their life, and so how my father's philosophy has changed. I think my father was a very practical man in the sense that, he wanted all of us to play music. Part of it was because he believed in the beauty of music as the cleanest way to transmit these emotions and the sentiments. I think there was a secondary motive where he wanted his orchestra to have as many of the members in the family contributing to it. And I don't have that secondary motive. I don't think with my kids. Although when my daughter tells me that her dream is to play on stage and I'm conducting, that's a pretty special. It's a pretty special dream, So I've learned so much from my father. He recently passed away as well, so it's made me think a lot about the integrity that he brought to everything that he did, and the uncompromising attitude that he had to everything in life. He for context, in the 60s, 70s, especially in the 80s in Romania, it turns out that most Romanians were informants on their fellow citizens, right, to the secret police. And it was some of the most complex and complicated system of all the crazy dictatorships that there have been. And, my father had always suffered both for himself professionally and for the kids, because he was never willing to compromise. And it was a simple ask of him, and because he had this orchestra in a church that was, very hard to infiltrate from the outside, he was always asked to, to share and to give reports on what was happening, what was said in meetings, what was, what happened, And my father was always uncompromised. And there was so much pressure, which is why actually the three oldest siblings that I have were never allowed to pursue higher education after high school, because they said, what, this is, if you don't collaborate with us, we will not let your kids continue. And my father said, what, if, even though he believed in education more than anything else, he said, what, this is a risk I'm willing to take, and a responsibility I'm willing to take. And I look at my own kids and I try to think, okay, how far am I willing to compromise to ensure that they have whatever is best for them? But it's a great lesson, to say, I'm going to offer everything I absolutely can. But it's also important that they understand the lesson that not compromising is just as important as receiving good education. And for me, the way that this relates to is the fact that I feel like in the 21st century, in the name of having a good status, a good economy, a good whatever, we've really thrown out the window everything that has to do with principles and everything that has to do with personal integrity. And people have justified absolutely anything, and they've traded integrity and personal beliefs and ethics and moral values. They've traded them for everything. They sold it for a better paycheck, or they sold it for a stock market that did better for a little while. Is that really the true measure of what value should represent in your life? So I've been thinking a lot about that. And I think my father, without ever saying a word to us about that, I think gave a very powerful and strong lesson in what actually is valuable in life, and what is the true way to achieve a happy life, that you look back at the end and you can be proud of the fact that no, you did not compromise. And maybe it would have been easier to compromise, but you chose not to do it because you held your belief system close, and your morals and the way that you treated your fellow citizen or your neighbor was more important to you than your own benefit. Okay, this was and I've been thinking about this. So I'm in front of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I'm conducting, and I don't know how this happened, because it's funny. I don't always use a cummerbund, guys have this like belt thing that is, and I don't. You're supposed to have one. I mean, it's part of the wardrobe, right?
Right.
But I tried as much as possible not to use one. But this one time I was like, okay, I need to use it. I mean, it was a special concert. So I have a cummerbund, and they're pretty secure, like it's not, they don't just fly off if you don't put it on properly, So I'm not sure like what happened. And this is also a problem that I have. The orchestra is tuning on stage, and I still have not finished putting on my shoes, right? So I get on stage and I'm conducting, and I do like some kind of a gesture, and all of a sudden my cummerbund goes boop, right?
Oh my gosh.
And I'm in front of the orchestra, and people can tell when something is wrong. So I like, the first thing that I did is I grabbed the cummerbund, and I'm holding it in my hand, and I'm conducting with my right hand. And then I have a black cummerbund in my hand. I can't turn the pages, so then like I put the cummerbund on the stage, on the stand, and I'm trying to unplay, and it's like not, and eventually I was just like, forget it, and I just threw it on the floor, right? And it just flies on the floor, and everyone is like looking, and they're looking at me, and it's like, okay, man, no, that was that was tough. Also because I had always heard of these stories of conductors, and wardrobe, going wrong and stuff, and I was always like, what idiots! Like, how can you? Like, what do you mean you walk on stage and your flies down or something like that? Like you have. But yeah,
that's awesome. So have you worn a cummerbund since, or have you figured it out? Or
no, I haven't.
Okay.
I'm just not gonna wear one.
That sounds like a good compromise.
My entire wardrobe is dependent on not wearing a cummerbund.
În picioare